The letter was sitting on my kitchen table when I woke up on the morning of my heart surgery, propped against the salt shaker like a white flag of surrender. Mom, Fiona has always dreamed of seeing Paris at 75, and this might be her last chance. You're strong and always figure things out on your own. The surgery is routine. You'll be fine. We'll call when we get back. Love, Logan. I read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated, my coffee growing cold in my hands as I processed what my son had just done to me. Today, the day I was supposed to have my aortic valve replaced. The day I'd been dreading for 6 months, ever since Dr. Patterson had looked at my test results with that careful expression doctors wear when they're about to change your life forever. Mrs. Evans, without this surgery, you have maybe 6 months. With it, you could have 20 good years ahead of you. I'd called Logan immediately after that appointment, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. I'm scared, honey, I'd admitted, something I rarely allowed myself to say out loud. Could you be there with me? Of course, Mom. Of course I'll be there. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of planning, of Logan helping me fill out the hospital paperwork, of him promising he'd drive me to the pre-op appointments, of him assuring me that Riley and the kids would visit during my recovery. Now he was in Paris with his mother-in-law, and I was sitting in my empty kitchen at 5 in the morning, holding a letter that felt like a death certificate for whatever relationship I thought we still had. My phone rang, startling me from my spiral of disbelief. Betty Martinez, my friend from the hospital where I'd worked for 40 years, her voice bright and artificially cheerful. Ready for your big day, honey? I'll be there in an hour to drive you in. Betty, thank God for Betty, who'd volunteered to be my emergency contact when it became clear that my family was unavailable. At 71, she was still working part-time in the cardiac unit, still the same no-nonsense woman who'd trained me when I was a terrified 22-year-old nursing student. Betty, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Logan's not coming. What do you mean he's not coming? He's in Paris, with Fiona. They left last night. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. When Betty finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of controlled fury I remembered from the times she'd had to deal with incompetent doctors or neglectful family members. That little shit. Betty. No, Leah, don't you dare defend him. What kind of man abandons his mother on the day of major heart surgery to take his mother-in-law on vacation? The kind of man Logan had become, apparently. The kind of man who'd spent the last 5 years orbiting around Fiona Williams like she was the sun and the rest of us were distant, forgettable planets. Ever since Riley's father had died and left Fiona that big house in the suburbs, Logan had been drawn there like metal to a magnet. Sunday dinners moved from my little apartment to Fiona's dining room. Holiday celebrations relocated to her perfectly decorated living room. The grandchildren started calling her Grandma Fiona, while I became Grandma Leah, as if the distinction in titles somehow reflected our relative importance in their lives. I'll be fine, I told Betty, though we both knew I was lying. The surgery is routine, right? That's what Logan said. Leah Marie Evans, don't you dare minimize this. Aortic valve replacement is major surgery. You need someone there who loves you, someone who'll advocate for you if complications arise, someone who'll hold your hand when you wake up scared and in pain. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of abandonment settle around my shoulders like a lead blanket. When had I become so expendable to my own son? When had Fiona's comfort become more important than my survival? I'll be that someone, Betty continued, her voice fierce with determination. And when you get through this, and you will get through this, you're going to have some serious thinking to do about what kind of relationship you want to have with people who treat you like you're disposable. After we hung up, I wandered through my small apartment, looking at the photos that chronicled a life of service and sacrifice. There was Logan at 8, grinning gap-toothed after I'd worked double shifts for 3 months to pay for his baseball camp. Logan at 16, rolling his eyes as I fussed over his prom tuxedo that I'd bought with overtime money from the ICU. Logan at 25, looking handsome in his wedding tux. Riley radiant beside him in the dress I'd helped pay for when her family came up short. When had gratitude turned into expectation? When had my willingness to sacrifice become evidence that I didn't need anything in return? I picked up the letter again, studying Logan's handwriting. Still the careful script I'd helped him perfect at the kitchen table while working my way through nursing school. Fiona has always dreamed of seeing Paris at 75, as if I'd never had dreams. as if my dreams had expired when I'd chosen to raise him alone after his father died, when I'd worked nights and weekends to keep us afloat, when I'd put his needs ahead of my own for 37 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to have heart surgery. My heart, the one that had broken a little more each time Logan chose Fiona's comfort over my presence, each time he'd canceled our lunch plans because Fiona needed him to drive her somewhere, each time he'd cut our phone conversations short because Fiona was calling on the other line. But there was something Logan didn't know, something I'd kept to myself out of modesty and a lifetime habit of not wanting to burden others with my small victories. 6 months ago, when I'd gotten the diagnosis and started researching heart surgeons, I'd entered a contest on a whim. America's Medical Miracles, that reality TV show where celebrity surgeon Dr. Alexander Stone performed revolutionary procedures on deserving patients. I'd filled out the application mostly as a distraction, something to keep my mind occupied during the sleepless nights when the reality of my condition would hit me like a freight train. "Tell us why you deserve a medical miracle," the application had asked. I'd written about my 40 years as a cardiac nurse, about the thousands of patients I'd held hands with in their darkest moments, about the families I'd comforted when miracles didn't happen. I'd written about choosing service over self, about finding purpose in other people's healing, about the quiet satisfaction of a life spent making others feel less alone. I never expected to hear back. Women like me, ordinary women, unremarkable women, women whose biggest achievement was raising decent human beings and saving lives one shift at a time. We didn't get chosen for television miracles, except I had been chosen. The call had come 2 weeks ago. A producer named Sarah, whose enthusiasm crackled through the phone like electricity. "Mrs. Evans, we've selected you for Dr. Stone's next episode. Your story moved our entire team to tears. You represent everything noble about healthcare, and Dr. Stone is personally invested in your case." I'd agreed, partly because the surgery would be free, and partly because some small, hidden part of me had always wondered what it would feel like to be special, to be celebrated, to be seen as someone worth saving. Logan didn't know about the show. I hadn't told him about being selected, hadn't mentioned the cameras that would be documenting my surgery, hadn't shared the news that I'd be receiving care from the most famous heart surgeon in the world. I'd planned to surprise him with the good news when he came to the hospital this morning. Instead, he was photographing the Eiffel Tower while I prepared to face the most frightening day of my life with only Betty's fierce loyalty to sustain me. But as I finished my coffee and prepared for the shower that would be my last before surgery, I felt something unexpected stirring beneath the hurt and abandonment, something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Logan thought I was routine, forgettable, someone who would figure it out and be fine without his support. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. In 6 hours, while he was sipping wine in a Parisian cafe, I would be on national television, having my life saved by the most celebrated surgeon in America. Some routines, I was learning, were more remarkable than they appeared. Betty arrived at my apartment driving her ancient Honda Civic with the kind of determined efficiency that had made her legendary in the cardiac unit. At 71, she still moved like someone half her age, her silver hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn for decades, her scrubs replaced today by a navy dress that somehow managed to look both respectful and ready for battle. "Don't even think about defending that son of yours," she said the moment I opened the door, reading my expression with the accuracy of someone who'd spent 40 years interpreting the subtle signs of cardiac distress. "I've been stewing about this for the past hour, and I have things to say." "Betty, please." "Leah, I was there when you worked 3 double shifts in a row to pay for Logan's college textbooks. I was there when you sold your grandmother's jewelry to help with his wedding expenses. I was there when you moved to this smaller apartment so you could help him with the down payment on that house." She paused, studying my face with the clinical attention she'd once reserved for post-operative patients. "When exactly did sacrificing everything for your child become evidence that you don't deserve anything in return?" I couldn't answer that question, partly because I didn't know the answer, and partly because thinking about it too deeply might crack something inside me that I needed to keep intact for the next few hours. "We should go," I said instead, picking up the small overnight bag I'd packed with careful attention to the hospital's guidelines. Comfortable clothes for after surgery, slippers with good grip, the book I'd probably be too medicated to read, but brought anyway, because the ritual of packing it made me feel prepared. The drive to Seattle Presbyterian Hospital took 45 minutes through morning traffic that seemed particularly dense, as if the entire city had conspired to make this day more stressful than it needed to be. Betty filled the silence with stories about other patients she'd seen through major surgeries, carefully avoiding any mention of complications or negative outcomes. "Remember Mrs. Patterson from 4B?" she said, as we stopped at yet another red light. "Triple bypass at 82, and now she's training for a marathon. Well, maybe not a marathon, but she walks 5 miles every day and has more energy than people half her age. Betty, you don't have to." "I'm not trying to reassure you about the surgery, honey. I'm trying to remind you that your life isn't over, that whatever happens with Logan and his misplaced priorities, you have 20 good years ahead of you to live however you want to live them." We pulled into the hospital parking garage, and I felt my stomach clench with the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that had accompanied me to work for 4 decades. But this time was different. This time I wasn't here to save someone else's life. I was here to have my own life saved. The admission process was surprisingly streamlined, handled by a team of production assistants who moved with the kind of choreographed efficiency that suggested they'd done this many times before. I found myself in a private preoperative suite that was larger and more luxurious than any hospital room I'd ever seen, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and enough space for what appeared to be professional filming equipment. "Mrs. Evans?" A young woman with a clipboard and the kind of bright smile that belonged on television entered the room. "I'm Sarah Martinez, one of the producers for America's Medical Miracles. Dr. Stone would like to meet with you before we begin the preoperative interviews." Dr. Alexander Stone entered the room like a force of nature, tall and silver-haired, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that came from being internationally famous for saving lives. I recognized him from the billboards and magazine covers, but seeing him in person was different. He had the presence of someone who'd spent years being the most important person in any room he entered. "Mrs. Evans," he said, taking my hand in both of his. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your story is exactly why I started this show, to celebrate people whose quiet heroism deserves recognition. Dr. Stone, I'm not heroic. I'm just a retired nurse who needs heart surgery." "No, you're a woman who spent 40 years putting other people's lives before your own comfort, who worked night shifts and weekends to support your family, who chose service over self-advancement every day for 4 decades. His smile was warm but serious. "That's the definition of heroism, Mrs. Evans. It's just the kind that doesn't usually get recognition." He explained the procedure with the kind of careful detail I appreciated from my nursing background. How they would replace my failing aortic valve with a new mechanical valve, how the surgery would take approximately 4 hours, how the recovery would progress over the following weeks. "But here's what makes your case special," he continued, pulling out what looked like 3D imaging of my heart. "Your particular anatomy makes you an ideal candidate for a new technique I've been developing. Instead of the traditional open-heart approach, I can perform this surgery using a minimally invasive method that will reduce your recovery time by weeks and leave you with scars so small they'll be barely visible." "Why me?" I asked. "Out of all the patients who need this surgery, why was I selected?" Dr. Stone smiled. "Because our screening committee was moved by your application. 40 years of caring for cardiac patients, and you've never asked for anything in return. You've seen thousands of people through their worst medical crises, and now it's your turn to be on the receiving end of that care." What he didn't say, but what I could read in his expression, was that there was something particularly compelling about a woman who'd been abandoned by her family on the day of major surgery, something that would make for powerful television. "Dr. Stone, I should mention that my son isn't here today. He had other commitments." "I know. Our producers spoke with your friend Mrs. Martinez when she registered as your emergency contact." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he had opinions about sons who had other commitments on their mother's surgery days. "Mrs. Evans, I want you to know that the entire team here considers it an honor to care for you today." After he left, the preoperative routine began in earnest. Blood work, final cardiac tests, interviews with the production team about my nursing career and my family situation. I found myself talking about Logan with careful neutrality, describing his absence as a scheduling conflict rather than abandonment. "Tell us about your proudest moment as a mother," one of the interviewers asked. I thought about Logan's graduation from business school, about walking across the stage to receive his MBA, while I sat in the audience wearing the one good dress I owned, having worked extra shifts for months to help him cover his expenses. Watching him become independent, I said finally, knowing that he didn't need me anymore. It was only after I said it that I realized how that independence had somehow transformed into indifference, how not needing me had become not wanting me around. But that was a conversation for another day. Today was about survival, about putting myself in the hands of people who saw value in saving my life. As the anesthesia team prepared me for surgery, I thought about Logan sipping coffee at a sidewalk cafe in Paris, probably posting photos on social media about Fiona's lifelong dream coming true. He had no idea that his mother's quiet life was about to become anything but routine. In a few hours, while he was touring the Louvre, I would be on national television, having my life saved by the most famous heart surgeon in America. The irony was almost enough to make me smile as the anesthesia mask settled over my face. Almost. I woke up to the sound of machines beeping rhythmically around me and the sensation of someone holding my hand. The recovery room came into focus gradually. Bright lights, medical equipment, and Betty's familiar face hovering over me with an expression that mixed relief with something that looked suspiciously like triumph. There she is, Betty said softly. How are you feeling, honey? Like I got hit by a truck, I managed, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. But a truck driven by someone who knew what they were doing. Betty laughed, and I realized there were other people in the room. The production crew, still filming, and Dr. Stone, who approached my bedside with the kind of smile surgeons wore when everything had gone exactly according to plan. Mrs. Evans, the surgery was a complete success, he said, checking the monitors around my bed with practiced efficiency. Your new valve is working perfectly, and we were able to use the minimally invasive technique I mentioned. You'll have 3 small incisions instead of 1 large one, which means faster healing and minimal scarring. How long was I under? 3 hours and 47 minutes. Textbook procedure. Dr. Stone pulled up a chair beside my bed, and I realized the cameras were still rolling. Mrs. Evans, I need to tell you something. In my 30 years of cardiac surgery, I've rarely seen someone with your combination of anatomical factors that made this new technique possible. You're going to be the poster case for minimally invasive aortic valve replacement. What does that mean? It means that your surgery is going to change how we approach this procedure for thousands of future patients. You're not just receiving care, Mrs. Evans, you're advancing it. Through my post-surgical haze, I tried to process what he was telling me. Somehow my routine surgery had become groundbreaking medicine. There's something else, Doctor, Stone continued, glancing at the production crew. The response to your story has been extraordinary. The preliminary interviews we posted on social media yesterday have already been viewed over 2 million times. 2 million? People are calling you the angel nurse. Your 40 years of service, your dedication to patients, your grace under pressure. It's resonating with viewers in a way we've never seen before. Betty squeezed my hand. Leah, you need to see this. She held up her phone, showing me a social media post with a photo of me from yesterday's pre-operative interview. The comments were overwhelming. Hundreds of nurses sharing their own stories, former patients thanking me for care I didn't remember giving, people expressing outrage that my family had abandoned me on surgery day. I don't understand, I said, trying to make sense of what I was seeing through the medication fog. How did people find out about Logan? The producers didn't identify him specifically, Betty explained. But when they mentioned that your son was traveling during your surgery, people put pieces together. Apparently, someone found Logan's social media posts from Paris. My stomach dropped. What kind of posts? Betty hesitated, then showed me Logan's Instagram account. Photos of him, Riley, and Fiona at the Eiffel Tower, smiling and raising champagne glasses. The caption read, "Making Fiona's dream come true. Paris at 75, life is beautiful. Family first. Bucket list, Heart Paris 2024. The timestamp showed it had been posted 3 hours ago while I was in surgery. Oh God, I whispered. It gets worse, Betty said gently. Look at the comments. Hundreds of people had found Logan's post and were expressing their disgust in increasingly harsh terms. While your mother was having heart surgery? What kind of son are you? Your mother is a saint and you're in Paris posting selfies. The comments kept coming. angrier and more specific as people connected my story to his social media presence. Dr. Stone cleared his throat. Mrs. Evans, I should mention that we've received thousands of messages for you. Cards, flowers, offers of support from all over the country. It seems you've touched more lives than you realized. This is getting out of hand, I said, panic beginning to cut through the pain medication. I never wanted this kind of attention. I just wanted to get through the surgery quietly. Leah, Betty said firmly, you spent 40 years being quiet about your contributions. You worked extra shifts without complaint, stayed late to comfort families, trained dozens of new nurses without ever asking for recognition. Maybe it's time the world saw what the rest of us have always known, that you're extraordinary. But Logan made his choice, Dr. Stone said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions. You can't protect someone from the consequences of their own actions, Mrs. Evans. Your son chose to prioritize someone else's vacation over his mother's life-saving surgery. The fact that it's become public is unfortunate, but it's not your responsibility to manage his image. A nurse entered the room with a stack of what looked like mail. Mrs. Evans, these arrived for you in the past hour. We had to set up a separate area just to handle the deliveries. I stared at the letters and packages, overwhelmed by the idea that strangers cared more about my recovery than my own son seemed to. There's something else, the producer Sarah said from behind the camera. The response has been so strong that the network wants to extend your story. Instead of a single episode, they're proposing a feature-length special about healthcare heroes like you. What would that involve? Following your recovery, highlighting your nursing career, maybe featuring some of the patients whose lives you've impacted over the years. Sarah paused, checking her notes. And, Mrs. Evans, there's the matter of your participation fee. Participation fee? For appearing on the show, for allowing us to document your surgery and recovery. It's standard for all featured patients. She smiled. $330,000. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my heart monitor. $330,000. More money than I'd ever seen at one time. More than my annual salary had been for most of my nursing career. That's not possible, I whispered. It's very possible, Dr. Stone said. And it's the least you deserve for sharing your story with the world. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been an abandoned mother facing surgery alone. Now I was apparently a social media sensation with hundreds of thousands of supporters and more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. My phone, which Betty had been managing, began ringing insistently. She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's Logan," she said. I stared at the phone, remembering the letter he'd left on my kitchen table, the casual dismissal of my fears and needs, the assumption that I would figure it out and be fine without his support. "He's called 12 times in the past hour," Betty continued. "Riley's called 6 times. Even Fiona has called." They saw the posts, I realized. They saw the posts. They saw the comments on Logan's social media. They saw their names trending on Twitter with hashtags like Ani Heartless Family and Fincham Paris Overparent. I thought about my son, probably sitting in some expensive Parisian hotel, frantically trying to manage a public relations disaster, while his mother who'd just had life-saving surgery, lay in a hospital bed surrounded by strangers who cared more about her welfare than he did. "What do you want me to tell him?" Betty asked. I looked at the flowers from strangers, the letters from people who valued what I'd given to healthcare, the evidence that my quiet life had somehow mattered to more people than I'd ever imagined. Then I looked at Betty, who'd driven across town to hold my hand through surgery because my own family had chosen a vacation over my life. "Tell him nothing," I said finally. "If Logan wants to talk to me, he can come home from Paris and say what he needs to say in person." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. This time, I didn't even look at who was calling. Some conversations, I was learning, were worth waiting for until you were strong enough to have them on your own terms. The next morning brought a parade of visitors I never expected to see. Dr. Stone arrived with his coffee and a stack of newspapers, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and barely concealed amazement. "Mrs. Evans, you've made the front page of 3 major papers," he said, spreading them across my bedside table. "And not just in the medical section, front page news." I stared at the headlines through my still foggy post-surgical vision. The nurse who healed America's heart. Abandoned mother becomes medical miracle. And most prominently, Angel Nurse's surgery watched by 15 million. 15 million people? The live stream broke records for medical programming. The network is calling it a cultural phenomenon. Dr. Stone settled into the chair beside my bed, his usual professional distance softened by something that looked like genuine wonder. Mrs. Evans, in 30 years of television medicine, I've never seen public response like this. Betty arrived with my morning coffee, smuggled from the good cafe down the street because hospital coffee, as she put it, wasn't fit for someone recovering from having her life saved, and found me staring at newspaper photos of myself that I didn't remember being taken. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked, settling into her vigil chair with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing post-operative patients. "Overwhelmed," I admitted. "Yesterday, I was just a retired nurse having heart surgery. Today, I'm apparently... What am I exactly?" "You're someone who reminded America what real character looks like," Dr. Stone said. "In an age of superficial celebrity and manufactured drama, your story represents something authentic. 40 years of quiet service, and then grace under abandonment. People are hungry for that kind of genuineness." My phone had been ringing constantly since yesterday evening, but Betty had appointed herself my communications manager, screening calls and taking messages with the fierce protectiveness of a cardiac unit charge nurse. "Logan's called 37 times, she reported. "Riley's called 22 times. Fiona has called 6 times, and I have to say, she sounds increasingly panicked." "What are they saying?" "Logan keeps saying there's been a misunderstanding, that he needs to explain the situation. Riley is crying in most of her voicemails, saying she never realized how it would look. And Fiona," Betty paused, consulting her notes, "Fiona is demanding that you stop this media circus immediately." I almost smiled at that. Even facing public humiliation, Fiona was still issuing demands. "There's something else," Betty continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. "The social media response has gotten intense. Logan's had to disable comments on all his posts. Riley deactivated her Instagram entirely. Someone found photos of their Paris trip and started a hashtag called #ParisOverParent. Betty, I never wanted this to hurt them. Honey, they hurt themselves. You didn't force Logan to post champagne photos while you were having surgery. You didn't make him choose Fiona's vacation over his mother's medical crisis. All you did was exist and need help, and they failed you spectacularly." Dr. Stone nodded gravely. "Mrs. Evans, I've seen a lot of family dynamics around medical crises. What your son did isn't just uncommon. It's shocking to medical professionals. We've had dozens of nurses and doctors reach out expressing their support and their disbelief." "What kind of support?" "Well, for starters, the American Nurses Association wants to give you their Lifetime Achievement Award. 5 different medical schools want you to speak at their graduation ceremonies. And," he paused, smiling slightly, "the network has received over 2,000 requests from single men wanting to take you out to dinner." "Oh, dear God." "Don't worry, we're screening those very carefully," Betty said with a grin. "Though there are some very distinguished gentlemen in that pile, including a retired cardiac surgeon from Johns Hopkins who wrote a very eloquent letter about wanting to cook you dinner and discuss your experiences in cardiac nursing." I closed my eyes, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. Yesterday's quiet desperation had somehow become today's national inspiration, and I didn't know how to navigate any of it. "There's also the matter of the money," Dr. Stone said gently. "The $330,000 participation fee. The network wants to present it to you officially during tomorrow's follow-up interview, but I wanted to discuss it privately first. I can't accept that much money." "Why not?" "Because I didn't do anything to earn it. I just had surgery." Dr. Stone leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mrs. Evans, you shared your story with 15 million people. You showed them what dedication looks like, what real sacrifice means, what happens when someone spends their life putting others first. If that's not worth $330,000, I don't know what is." "But Logan and Riley are adults who made adult decisions," Betty interrupted firmly. "Leah, for 40 years you've been worrying about everyone else's feelings, everyone else's comfort, everyone else's financial situation. Maybe it's time you worried about your own." A soft knock interrupted our conversation, and Sarah Martinez, the producer, entered with her perpetual clipboard and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Evans, I have some news. The response to your story has been so overwhelming that we've received an offer from a major publisher. They want to work with you on a book about your nursing experiences. And," she paused dramatically, "Oprah's People Called. They want you for her Super Soul Sunday program." "Oprah? Oprah. As in Oprah Winfrey wants to interview you about finding grace in abandonment and building a meaningful life through service to others." I stared at Sarah, then at Dr. Stone, then at Betty, who was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "This is insane," I whispered. "This is justice," Betty corrected. "This is what happens when the universe finally decides to reward someone who's been giving without receiving for 4 decades. My phone buzzed with yet another call from Logan. I could see his name on the screen, could imagine his panic as he watched his abandoned mother become an international sensation while he dealt with the public consequences of his choices. "Mrs. Evans," Sarah said gently, "we do need to discuss how you want to handle the family situation. The media is very interested in Logan's response, and there are rumors that he's flying back from Paris." "He is," Betty confirmed, checking her own phone. According to the airline tracking website some internet detective found, Logan, Riley, and Fiona are on a flight that lands in Seattle at 6:47 p.m. "They're coming here?" "They're coming home," Dr. Stone said. "The question is whether you're ready to see them." I thought about the letter Logan had left on my kitchen table, about the casual cruelty of abandoning me on surgery day, about the 37 phone calls that had come only after his abandonment became public knowledge. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know what I want to say to someone who had to learn from social media that his mother's surgery was successful." "Then don't say anything yet," Betty advised. "You're recovering from major surgery. You don't owe anyone emotional labor right now, not even your son. Especially not your son," Dr. Stone added quietly. As afternoon faded into evening, I found myself surrounded by flowers from strangers, cards from former patients, and the strange new reality of being celebrated for the life I'd always lived quietly. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Logan was probably rehearsing apologies and explanations, trying to figure out how to manage a public relations disaster of his own making. But for the first time in years, his panic wasn't my emergency to solve. Some lessons, I was learning, had to be learned from 30,000 feet up, with nowhere to run and nothing to do but face the consequences of your choices. Logan arrived at the hospital at 8:23 p.m., still wearing his travel clothes and the kind of desperate expression I recognized from his childhood when he'd broken something valuable and needed my forgiveness. Riley followed behind him, her eyes red from crying, clutching a bouquet of expensive flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Fiona brought up the rear, her face a mask of barely controlled fury at finding herself in what she clearly considered an undignified situation. Betty had positioned herself in the chair closest to my bed like a guard dog, and I watched her evaluate my visitors with the same clinical assessment she'd once used on potentially problematic family members in the cardiac unit. "Mom," Logan said, his voice breaking on the word. "Thank God you're okay. We came as soon as we could." "As soon as you could," I repeated, my voice carefully neutral. "After you saw the news coverage." "That's not, I mean, we were already planning to come back." "Logan," I interrupted gently, "I'm very tired. Surgery takes a lot out of someone my age. Maybe you could tell me why you're here." He looked genuinely confused by the question, as if the answer should be obvious. "Because you're my mother. Because you had surgery. Because I was worried about you." "You were worried about me yesterday when you left for Paris?" Riley stepped forward, clutching her flowers like a shield. "Mrs. Evans, we never meant for it to happen this way. The timing was just unfortunate." "Unfortunate." I tested the word, rolling it around like a foreign phrase I was trying to understand. "Is that what we're calling it?" Fiona finally spoke, her voice carrying the imperious tone she'd used for the 5 years she'd been rearranging my family's priorities. "Leah, this media spectacle has gotten completely out of hand. Logan's been crucified on social media for what amounts to a scheduling conflict. You need to make a statement clarifying that there are no hard feelings." I looked at this woman who'd somehow convinced my son that her dreams were more important than his mother's life, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not my new heart valve, but something deeper and more fundamental. "Fiona, why don't you tell me about Paris?" "What? Paris?" Was it everything you dreamed it would be? Fiona's eyes narrowed, clearly sensing a trap, but not sure where it was hidden. It was lovely, educational, a cultural experience. I'm glad you got to see the Eiffel Tower and drink champagne and take photos while I was having my chest cracked open and my heart rebuilt. Mom, that's not fair, Logan started. What's not fair exactly? That I'm pointing out what happened, or that it happened in the first place? Betty cleared her throat. Logan, maybe you could explain to your mother why Fiona's vacation was more important than her life-saving surgery. It wasn't more important. It was just, the timing was already set, and Mom's always been so independent, so capable of handling things on her own. So you thought I could handle heart surgery on my own too. I thought the surgery was routine. I thought you'd be fine. And if I hadn't been fine? If there had been complications? If I died on that table yesterday? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Logan's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who'd once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. Don't say that. Don't even think that. Logan, I've been thinking about nothing else for 6 months. About dying alone. About not having anyone who loved me holding my hand when I went under anesthesia. About the possibility that my son might not even find out I was gone until he got back from vacation. Riley burst into tears. We didn't know it would be like this. We didn't know everyone would react so strongly. We just thought, you thought what, Riley? We thought you'd understand. That you'd be proud we were taking care of Fiona, making her dreams come true. She's 75, and this might have been her last chance to travel. And I'm 67, and yesterday might have been my last chance to have my son with me when I needed him most. Fiona stepped forward, her face tight with the kind of controlled anger I'd seen her use to manipulate Logan for years. Leah, you're being dramatic. The surgery went fine, you're recovering well, and you've gotten more attention and sympathy than any reasonable person could expect. I think it's time to put this behind us. Put what behind us, Fiona? This performance, this victim act that's making my family look bad. I felt Betty tense beside me, and I could practically hear her internal debate about whether to throw Fiona out of the room physically or just verbally eviscerate her. Your family? I said quietly. Logan and Riley and the children. My family. This public humiliation is affecting all of us. Fiona, they're not your family. They're mine. Logan is my son, not yours. Those are my grandchildren, not yours. And the humiliation isn't mine. It's yours. You convinced a man to abandon his mother on the day of heart surgery so you could see the Eiffel Tower. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. You wanted to go to Paris, and Logan chose your wants over my needs. The fact that it became public knowledge doesn't change the fundamental truth of what you asked him to do. Logan finally found his voice, though it sounded hollow and defeated. Mom, what do you want from us? What do you want me to say? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, and realized that what I wanted might not be something he could give me anymore. I want you to want to be here, Logan. Not because social media is shaming you. Not because the story went viral. Not because you're worried about your reputation. I want you to want to hold your mother's hand after heart surgery because you love her and you're grateful she survived. I do love you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of having a mother who doesn't inconvenience you, who figures everything out on her own, who never asks for more than you're comfortable giving? The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my monitors and Riley's quiet crying. Logan stared at me like he was seeing someone he'd never met before, and maybe he was. The thing is, I continued, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, I don't need you to fix this, Logan. I don't need you to manage the media coverage or defend your choices or even apologize. What I need is for you to decide whether you want a relationship with me that's based on mutual respect and genuine care, or whether you want to continue treating me like an obligation you fulfill when convenient. Because yesterday, while you were raising champagne glasses in Paris, I learned something important. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that my life has touched more people than I realized, and that I deserve to be surrounded by people who value my presence rather than tolerate my existence. Fiona's face had gone pale, and I realized she was beginning to understand that her manipulation had backfired spectacularly. The $330,000 I'm receiving for sharing my story? That's more money than I've ever had at one time. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone. Enough to make my own choices about how I want to spend whatever years I have left. Mom, Logan whispered, are you saying you don't want us in your life anymore? I looked at my son, at the panic in his eyes as he realized he might lose something he'd taken for granted, and felt my heart, my new, strong heart, break a little for both of us. I'm saying that I want you in my life because you choose to be here, not because you feel obligated. And Logan, that choice has to be yours to make. The next 3 days passed in a blur of interviews, medical checkups, and the surreal experience of watching my life become a national conversation. Dr. Stone declared my recovery remarkable for someone your age, though I suspected the real miracle wasn't my physical healing, but the strange sense of clarity that seemed to accompany my new heart valve. Betty had appointed herself my unofficial manager, screening the dozens of interview requests and business offers that arrived daily. 60 Minutes wants you, she announced over breakfast, reading from her ever-present list. So does Ellen, though her show might be ending soon. 3 different publishers are bidding on your book rights, and something called the Hallmark Channel wants to make a movie about your life. A movie? Starring Meryl Streep if you approve. Apparently she called the network personally to express interest. I stared at Betty, wondering if the anesthesia had affected my hearing. Meryl Streep wants to play me in a movie? Meryl Streep wants to play a woman whose quiet heroism and grace under abandonment represents everything noble about American womanhood. Betty consulted her notes. That's a direct quote from her publicist. Logan hadn't returned since our confrontation 3 days ago, though he'd sent flowers with a card that read, Mom, I'm trying to understand what you need from me. I love you, Logan. Riley had called twice, both conversations brief and awkward, circling around apologies she couldn't quite manage and explanations that never fully explained anything. But it was Fiona's response that surprised me most. She arrived at my hospital room on Thursday morning, alone and looking older than her 75 years. Gone was the imperious confidence that had characterized her interactions with my family for the past 5 years. In its place was something that looked suspiciously like genuine humility. Leah, she said quietly, settling into the visitor's chair without her usual assumption of authority. We need to talk, do we? I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the kind of social pleasantry that smooths over problems without addressing them. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to expecting from Fiona. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before. Recognition of genuine wrongdoing. I'm listening. For 5 years, I've been treating you like competition for Logan's attention instead of recognizing you as the woman who raised the man I've come to depend on. Fiona's voice was steady but quiet. I convinced myself that you were too needy, too demanding of his time and energy. I told myself that encouraging him to prioritize his immediate family, Riley and the children and me, was healthy boundary setting. And now I've spent 3 days watching the entire country express horror at the idea of abandoning you during surgery, and I've had to face the fact that I orchestrated exactly that abandonment. Fiona paused, looking out the window at the Seattle skyline. I've also had to face the fact that Logan's 2 children, your grandchildren, haven't seen their grandmother in 3 months because I've been scheduling family activities that exclude you. Fiona, please, let me finish. I need to say this. She turned back to me, her eyes bright with tears I'd never seen her shed. I convinced Logan that you were a burden instead of a blessing. I made him choose between his mother's needs and my wants, and I framed it as him choosing his future over his past. I was wrong about everything. The honesty in her voice was so unexpected that I felt my own eyes fill with tears. The truth is, Fiona continued, I was jealous. Jealous that Logan loved you unconditionally while I had to earn his attention with gifts and trips and constant validation. Jealous that you raised him to be the kind of man who would sacrifice for family, then convinced him to stop sacrificing for you. Jealous that you were secure in his love while I was always afraid of losing it. Fiona, Logan loves you. Logan feels responsible for me. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box beside my bed. Since Riley's father died, I've been terrified of being alone, of becoming irrelevant, of facing my own mortality without someone to manage my fears for me. So I turned Logan into my emotional caretaker and convinced him it was normal family duty. I thought about the past 5 years, about the gradual way Logan had shifted his attention from my needs to Fiona's demands, and realized I was seeing the architecture of her manipulation clearly for the first time. "The Paris trip," I said. "The Paris trip was me panicking about turning 75 without having experienced the things I thought would make my life meaningful. But Leah, I could have gone to Paris any time in the past 5 years. I chose your surgery date because I was testing whether Logan would choose me over you when it really mattered. And he did. And he did. And I was triumphant for about 6 hours until I realized what I'd actually accomplished. I'd turned a good man into someone who could abandon his mother during a medical crisis. I'd won a competition I'd created against someone who wasn't even playing. We sat in silence for several minutes, processing the weight of her admission. Outside my window, Seattle moved through its daily rhythms, people pursuing their ambitions and relationships with varying degrees of honesty and self-awareness. "Fiona, what do you want from me now? I want to know if there's a way to undo the damage I've done, to your relationship with Logan, to your relationship with your grandchildren, to the family dynamics I've spent 5 years systematically destroying." Before I could answer, my phone rang. Betty, who was handling my calls from the nurses' station, appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Leah, you need to take this. It's the White House." "The what now?" "The White House. As in, the President of the United States wants to personally thank you for your service to American healthcare and invite you to a ceremony honoring everyday heroes." I stared at Betty, then at Fiona, then at the phone in my hand. Yesterday, I'd been a retired nurse recovering from surgery. Today, the President wanted to meet me. "Take the call," Fiona said quietly. "This is bigger than our family drama, Leah. This is about recognizing the kind of person you've always been." The conversation with the White House liaison was brief but surreal. The President had seen the America's Medical Miracles special and wanted to include me in a ceremony recognizing healthcare workers who'd made extraordinary contributions to their communities. The event would be televised nationally and include a personal meeting with the President. After I hung up, Fiona and I sat staring at each other in the strange new reality my life had become. "Leah," she said finally, "I spent 5 years convincing Logan you were ordinary, forgettable, someone whose needs could be safely ignored. I was wrong about that too. I am ordinary, Fiona. I'm just ordinary in a way that apparently resonates with people. No, you're extraordinary in a way that looks ordinary to people who don't pay attention." She stood up, gathering her purse and coat. "I'm going to talk to Logan tonight. Really talk to him about what I've done to this family and what he needs to do to fix it. Fiona, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't fix this, you're going to move on with your new life and your new opportunities, and Logan is going to lose the best thing that ever happened to him without ever understanding what he lost." As she reached the door, Fiona turned back to me one more time. "For what it's worth, Leah, I think you're going to be extraordinary at being famous too. The world needs more examples of what real character looks like." After she left, I sat in my hospital bed thinking about forgiveness, redemption, and the strange ways that public humiliation could sometimes lead to private truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Logan. "Mom, Fiona told me everything. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about the conversation we needed to have and whether I was strong enough to have it. Some healing, I was learning, required more than just surgical intervention. But maybe, with enough honesty and courage, broken families could learn to beat with the same rhythm as repaired hearts. Logan returned to my hospital room that evening, but this time he came alone and carried himself differently, like someone who'd been forced to look in a mirror and hadn't liked what he'd seen. He sat in the chair Fiona had vacated earlier, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, and for several minutes, neither of us spoke. "Fiona told me what she said to you," he began finally, "about the manipulation, about turning me against you, about Paris being a test. And what do you think about that?" "I think she's right. I think I've been an idiot and a terrible son, and I don't know how to fix it." His voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I don't even know when it started. When did I stop seeing you as a person with your own needs and start seeing you as, what? An obligation? A chore to manage?" I studied my son's face, seeing traces of the boy who'd once told me I was his best friend, who'd insisted I read him bedtime stories long past the age when his friends had outgrown them. "I think it started when you got married," I said gently. When you had to figure out how to balance being a son with being a husband and father. That's normal, Logan. What wasn't normal was how I disappeared from the equation instead of finding a new place in it. But you didn't disappear. You were always there when I needed you. Always ready to help with money or babysitting or whatever crisis came up. Being available isn't the same as being valued, sweetheart. I became convenient rather than important. Logan was quiet for a long time, processing this distinction. When did you stop feeling important to me? I thought about the question, tracing the gradual erosion of my place in his life. Remember your birthday 3 years ago? You were turning 34, and I'd planned a small dinner party. Just family, your favorite cake, some of the friends you'd grown up with. I remember. Fiona decided that same weekend to redecorate her guest bathroom and needed help moving furniture. You canceled our dinner to help her, and when I mentioned that we'd had plans, you said, "Mom, you'll understand. Fiona really needs me right now." But you did understand. You always understood. I understood that Fiona's bathroom remodel was more important to you than celebrating your birthday with your mother. That's when I realized I'd become the person you turned to when everyone else was busy, not someone whose time was valuable in itself. Logan's face crumpled slightly. I thought you preferred it that way. You always seemed so independent, so capable of entertaining yourself. Fiona needed constant attention, constant reassurance, and you just handled everything quietly. Logan, I handled everything quietly because I thought that's what you needed from me. But handling things quietly isn't the same as not needing support. Like with the surgery. I've been afraid of dying alone since the day I got the diagnosis. Not afraid of dying. Afraid of dying alone, without anyone who loved me holding my hand. And when you promised to be there, I felt safe for the first time in months. And then I abandoned you for Paris. You abandoned me for Fiona's Paris trip. There's a difference. Logan stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you think I'm a good person? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could give him the easy answer, the comforting lie that mothers are supposed to tell their children. Or I could give him the truth that might actually help him become the man I'd raised him to be. I think you're a good person who's been making bad choices, I said finally. I think you have the capacity for kindness, generosity, and real love, but you've let someone else's neediness become more important than your own integrity. Someone else's neediness, meaning Fiona. Someone else's neediness, meaning anyone who demands your attention more loudly than the people who deserve it most. Logan turned back from the window, his expression serious. What would it take for you to trust me again? Trust you with what? With your heart, with your feelings, with believing that I actually want to be your son instead of just going through the motions. I thought about the question, about the months of gradual distancing, about the letter on my kitchen table, about the 37 phone calls that had come only after public shame forced his attention. Time, I said. Consistency. Choosing me sometimes when it's inconvenient, not just when it's easy. What does that look like practically? It looks like Sunday dinners at my apartment instead of always at Fiona's house. It looks like remembering my birthday without Riley reminding you. It looks like calling me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something or feel guilty about not calling. And if I do those things, then maybe we can rebuild something real instead of just maintaining something obligatory. Logan returned to his chair, leaning forward with the intensity I remembered from his childhood when he was trying to solve a problem that really mattered to him. Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. About the money, about the fame, about all of this. He gestured toward the flowers and cards that filled my room. I'm proud of you. I'm proud that the whole country is seeing what I should have seen all along, that you're extraordinary. Logan, no, let me finish. I'm proud, but I'm also scared. Scared that you're going to realize you don't need me anymore, that you can have a rich, full life without dealing with a son who took you for granted for so long. I looked at this man who'd been both my greatest joy and my deepest disappointment and felt something shift in my chest, not my heart valve, but the organ it was protecting. Sweetheart, I've never needed you. I've always wanted you. There's a difference. What's the difference? Need is about desperation and dependence. Want is about choice and love. I don't need you to take care of me or manage my life or solve my problems. I want you in my life because you're my son, and I love watching you become the man you're capable of being. Even after everything I've done wrong? Especially after everything you've done wrong. Because now you have the chance to do better. And that's all any parent really wants. To see their child learn from their mistakes and grow into someone they can be proud of. Logan's eyes filled with tears. Can I hug you? I know you're still recovering from surgery, but come here. He leaned over my hospital bed carefully, wrapping his arms around me with the gentle precision of someone who finally understood that the person he was holding was fragile and precious and irreplaceable. I love you, Mom, he whispered against my shoulder. I'm sorry it took a national television show for me to remember how to show it. I love you too, sweetheart. But Logan? Yeah? This is the easy part. The hard part is going to be changing your behavior when the cameras aren't rolling and the world isn't watching. I know. But Mom? What? I'm ready to do the hard part. For the first time in years, I'm ready to be the son you deserved all along. As Logan left to begin the difficult work of rebuilding our relationship, I realized that my heart surgery had accomplished something Dr. Stone hadn't mentioned in his preoperative consultation. It had given me the courage to demand the love I deserved instead of accepting whatever scraps I was offered. Some miracles, I was learning, happened one honest conversation at a time. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was released from the hospital with Dr. Stone's blessing, a stack of medications, and what felt like the entire nation following my recovery. The discharge process took 3 hours instead of the usual 30 minutes because of the media presence and the parade of well-wishers who'd gathered outside Seattle Presbyterian. Mrs. Evans, Sarah Martinez called as I navigated the wheelchair protocol. Channel 7 wants a brief statement about your recovery. Nothing extensive, just a few words for the viewers who've been following your story. The viewers who'd been following my story. I still couldn't quite wrap my mind around the fact that strangers across the country were invested in my healing process, that my quiet life had somehow become a source of inspiration for people I'd never met. Keep it simple, Betty advised, as we approached the microphone set up outside the hospital entrance. Thank people for their support. Mention how well you're feeling and get to your car before this turns into a circus. But when I saw the crowd of people holding handmade signs, "We love you, Nurse Evans. Heroes don't need capes. Thank you for your service," I realized this wasn't just media attention anymore. This had become something larger and more meaningful. I want to thank everyone for their kindness during my recovery, I said into the microphones, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Your cards and letters and prayers have meant more to me than you'll ever know. And I want to thank the medical team at Seattle Presbyterian for giving me not just a new heart valve, but a new appreciation for what it means to be cared for by people who truly value your life. Mrs. Evans, a reporter called out, what's next for you? There are rumors about book deals, speaking engagements, even a possible foundation in your name. I looked at the crowd of faces, at people who'd taken time from their own lives to celebrate a stranger's survival, and felt something click into place. What's next is living, I said simply. For 40 years, I had the privilege of helping other people through medical crises. Now I have the opportunity to show people that it's never too late to start a new chapter, to be valued for who you really are, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Logan appeared at my elbow, having somehow navigated through the crowd to reach me. He'd been at the hospital every day since our conversation, not hovering or managing, but simply present, reading newspapers while I napped, bringing me decent coffee, learning how to be supportive without being overwhelming. Ready to go home, Mom? He asked quietly. Home. The word felt different now, carrying possibility rather than resignation. The drive to my apartment passed in comfortable silence, Logan handling the media presence with surprising grace, while I processed the surreal experience of returning to ordinary life as a minor celebrity. When we pulled into my familiar parking space, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief to be away from public attention, anticipation for whatever came next. My apartment had been transformed during my hospital stay. Logan and Riley had cleaned and organized with military precision, stocking the refrigerator with healthy foods and arranging the living room to accommodate my recovery needs. Fresh flowers filled every available surface, and someone had set up a comfortable reading corner by the window with pillows and blankets and a stack of books people had recommended. Riley wanted to be here when you came home, Logan said as he helped me settle into my favorite chair. But the kids had school activities, and she didn't want to overwhelm you on your first day back. That's thoughtful of her. She's been different since Paris, more aware, I guess, of how she contributed to the family dynamics that led to everything. Logan paused, studying my face. Mom, she wants to apologize to you properly, but she's afraid you won't forgive her. Logan, there's nothing for Riley to forgive. She was caught between loyalty to her mother and loyalty to her husband. That's an impossible position. But she chose her mother's wants over your needs, too. Riley is 28 years old and has been managing Fiona's emotional needs since her father died. She was trained to prioritize keeping peace over asking difficult questions. I settled back into my chair, feeling the comfort of familiar surroundings after weeks of hospital sterility. What matters now is whether she can learn to make different choices going forward. Logan nodded, then pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. Speaking of choices, there's something I need to discuss with you. About the foundation. What foundation? The one people want to create in your name. The offers are real, Mom. Publishers, networks, organizations. Everyone wants to work with you to turn your story into something that helps other people. I took the envelope, scanning through proposals that seemed to involve amounts of money and levels of responsibility I'd never imagined. A nursing education foundation, a program for supporting abandoned elderly during medical crises, speaking engagements at medical schools and nursing conferences. This is overwhelming, I admitted. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But Mom, people are offering you platforms to make the kind of impact you've been making quietly for 40 years, except now it could reach thousands of people instead of just the patients you worked with directly. I thought about the letters I'd received from nurses around the country, sharing their own stories of sacrifice and service, thanking me for representing their profession with dignity. About the families who'd written to say my story had inspired them to repair relationships they'd let deteriorate through neglect or misplaced priorities. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever makes you feel like you're using this opportunity wisely. You've always been someone who helps others. Now you have resources and visibility to help people on a scale you never had access to before. Logan was right, and I found myself thinking about the nurses I'd worked with over the decades, many of whom had struggled financially while dedicating their lives to caring for others. About families like mine who'd lost connection through misunderstanding and poor communication. About people who'd given quietly and generously without ever receiving recognition. I want to start small, I said finally. Maybe a scholarship fund for nursing students who can't afford the education they need. Maybe support groups for families dealing with medical crises. Things that address real problems without turning into publicity spectacles. That sounds perfect. And Mom, what? I want to help. Not as your manager or your decision maker, but as your partner in whatever you decide to build. I looked at my son, seeing in his expression the sincerity I'd been hoping for since our hospital conversation. What does that look like practically? It looks like me using my business experience to help you evaluate offers and manage logistics. It looks like me being present for meetings and decisions because I want to support your work, not because I feel guilty about Paris. And Fiona? Fiona has enrolled in therapy to work on her dependency issues and her fear of aging alone. She's also volunteering at a senior center, learning how to contribute to other people's lives instead of just demanding attention for her own needs. I felt something warm spread through my chest, not a medical complication, but simple satisfaction at the idea that everyone in my family was finally taking responsibility for their own growth instead of expecting me to manage their emotional needs. Logan, there's something I need to tell you about the money. What about it? The $330,000 from the show, plus whatever comes from book deals and speaking engagements. That's more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I don't need you to take care of me financially anymore. Mom, I never took care of you financially. You helped with my apartment, my car payments, my medical expenses. You've been quietly subsidizing my retirement for years, thinking I didn't notice. Logan looked embarrassed. You worked your whole life taking care of other people. It seemed like the least I could do, and I appreciated it. But now I want you to understand that I'm choosing to have you in my life because I love you, not because I need your help. That changes the dynamic of our relationship. How? It means that if you disappoint me again, I have other options. It means that your attention is a gift I receive, not a necessity I depend on. It means that you have to earn your place in my life through your actions, not maintain it through your obligations. Logan was quiet for several minutes, processing this shift in our family's power structure. That's scarier, he said finally. Good. It should be scary. Love should be earned and maintained, not taken for granted. As evening settled over Seattle, Logan prepared to leave for his own home, but something had changed between us. He wasn't leaving out of duty fulfilled or obligation discharged. He was leaving because we'd spent quality time together and would see each other again soon because we both wanted to. Mom, he said as he gathered his jacket, thank you. For what? For surviving the surgery, for giving me another chance, for showing me what it looks like to value yourself enough to demand better treatment. After he left, I sat in my apartment thinking about second chances, earned forgiveness, and the strange ways that public humiliation could sometimes lead to private healing. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Evans, this is Dr. James Patterson from Johns Hopkins. I'm the retired cardiac surgeon who wrote to you about cooking dinner and discussing cardiac nursing. If you're interested, I make an excellent salmon teriyaki, and I'd love to hear about your experiences in the field. I stared at the message, remembering Betty's mention of distinguished gentlemen among my admirers, and felt something flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with my new heart valve. At 67, with a television career and a foundation to build, and a son who was finally learning how to love me properly, I was apparently about to discover what it felt like to be courted by someone who saw me as extraordinary rather than convenient. Some chapters, I was learning, were worth waiting your whole life to begin. 3 months later, I stood in the rose garden of the White House, wearing a navy dress that cost more than my old monthly budget and feeling like an imposter among the 30 other healthcare heroes being honored by the president. The ceremony was being broadcast live to the nation, and I could see camera crews positioned strategically around the manicured lawn. Mrs. Evans, the president said as she approached me during the reception, your story has touched millions of Americans. The grace you showed during such a difficult personal time has inspired families across the country to reevaluate their relationships with elderly relatives. Thank you, Madam President. That means more to me than any award could. I understand you're launching a foundation to support nursing education? The Evans Institute for Compassionate Care, I confirmed. We're providing scholarships for nursing students from low-income families and funding support programs for healthcare workers who are struggling financially. And all of this grew out of your experience on that television show? I thought about the question, remembering the terror I'd felt the morning of my surgery, the letter Logan had left on my kitchen table, the strange journey from abandonment to national recognition. It grew out of learning that my life had value beyond what my family was willing to acknowledge, I said. Sometimes it takes strangers seeing your worth before the people who know you best remember to look. After the ceremony, I flew back to Seattle accompanied by Betty, who had appointed herself my official companion for such events. The flight was peaceful, a welcome break from the whirlwind of interviews and appearances that had filled my calendar since the foundation launched. Leah, Betty said, as we descended through the clouds toward home, I have to ask, are you happy with how everything has turned out? I considered the question while watching Seattle's familiar skyline come into view. 6 months ago, I'd been a retired nurse living quietly in a small apartment, grateful for whatever attention my family was willing to spare. Now I was returning from the White House, having shaken hands with the president and accepted recognition for a lifetime of service I'd never expected anyone to notice. I'm grateful, I said finally. Grateful that something good came from something so painful. But Betty, the happiest part isn't the fame or the money or the foundation. What is it then? It's Logan calling me every Tuesday just to talk. It's Riley bringing the kids to my apartment for Sunday dinner because they want to spend time with me, not because they feel obligated. It's having relationships based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. And Dr. Patterson? I smiled, thinking about the man who'd become an unexpected bright spot in my new life. Dr. James Patterson had indeed made excellent salmon teriyaki, and over the past month we'd discovered a shared passion for medical history, classic movies, and long conversations about everything from cardiac nursing techniques to the challenges of finding purpose in retirement. Dr. Patterson is proving that it's possible to be appreciated by someone who understands the value of the life you've lived, I said. I'm 77 years old, Betty. I never expected to experience that kind of recognition from anyone, let alone from a distinguished gentleman who thinks my stories about the cardiac unit are fascinating rather than boring. Just don't let him sweep you off your feet before you finish building your empire. My empire? 3 best-selling books, a national foundation, speaking engagements booked 2 years in advance, and a Lifetime movie starring Meryl Streep. If that's not an empire, I don't know what is. The movie. That still felt surreal. Meryl Streep had indeed signed on to portray me in Healing Hearts, the Leah Evans story, which was scheduled to begin filming next month. The screenplay, based on my first book, focused on the intersection of family dynamics and medical crises, using my story as a framework for exploring larger themes about aging, value, and the courage to demand better treatment. Betty, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think I'm being vindictive? Using my platform to tell a story that makes Logan look bad? Betty was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the careful attention she'd once given to complex medical cases. Honey, vindictive would be if you were lying about what happened or exaggerating Logan's failures for dramatic effect. But you're not doing that. You're telling the truth about a common family dynamic, adult children who take devoted parents for granted until something forces them to pay attention. But the consequences for Logan have been significant. The social media attention, the criticism from people who don't know the whole story, the way his business associates have questioned his character based on his treatment of me. And what has Logan said about those consequences? He says they were necessary, that he needed to understand how his actions looked to outsiders before he could understand why they were wrong. He says the public humiliation was uncomfortable, but ultimately educational. Then Logan is growing up, finally. The plane touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International, and I felt the familiar sense of homecoming that had become more meaningful since my surgery. Home now meant not just my apartment, but a city where I'd built a career and a reputation, where people recognized my contributions to healthcare, where I'd learned to value myself as highly as others valued me. Logan met me at baggage claim, as had become his custom whenever I returned from travel. Not because I needed help with logistics, but because he genuinely missed me during my 3-day absence and wanted to hear about my experiences at the White House. "How was the president?" he asked as we drove through the familiar streets toward my apartment. Gracious, intelligent, and surprisingly well-informed about nursing education policy. She's asked the Department of Health and Human Services to study our foundation model for potential national implementation. Mom, that's incredible. Your work could influence federal healthcare policy. I looked at my son, noting the genuine pride in his voice, the way he'd learned to celebrate my accomplishments without making them about him or his reflected glory. Logan, there's something I need to tell you about the Lifetime movie, about how they're portraying the Paris situation. I've read the script, Mom. My character comes across as selfish and misguided, but ultimately redeemable, which is exactly what I was. You're not concerned about how it will affect your reputation? My reputation needed to be affected. I made terrible choices, and I'm grateful that facing the consequences publicly has helped me become a better person. Logan paused at a red light, turning to look at me directly. Mom, I'm proud that your story is being told, even the parts that make me look bad. Especially the parts that make me look bad. Why especially those parts? Because maybe some other son will watch that movie and recognize himself before he abandons his mother for someone else's Paris trip. Maybe some other family will have the conversation we should have had years earlier, before a medical crisis forced everyone to confront their priorities. As we pulled into my apartment complex, I realized that Logan had learned something I'd been trying to teach him for years, that real love requires accountability, that meaningful relationships survive difficult truths, that growth happens only when people are willing to face their failures honestly. Logan, what are you doing Sunday afternoon? Whatever you want to do, Mom. James is coming for dinner, right? I'd like to get to know him better. Dr. James Patterson, who had indeed become a regular fixture in my Sunday routine, bringing his medical stories and his appreciation for my career and his gentle courtship that felt like the romantic attention I'd never received at any age. He's bringing his famous apple pie. And Logan? He's excited to meet the son who learned how to love his mother properly. Even after everything I did wrong? Especially after everything you did wrong. Because now he knows I raised a man who can learn from his mistakes and grow into someone worthy of respect. As Logan helped me carry my luggage upstairs, I thought about the journey from abandonment to recognition, from taken for granted to celebrated, from quiet service to public platform. The woman who'd woken up to find a letter of dismissal on her kitchen table 6 months ago had become someone whose story inspired millions, whose foundation would help thousands, whose example would outlive her by generations. But the real miracle wasn't the fame or the money or the recognition. The real miracle was that, at 67, I'd finally learned to value myself enough to demand the love I deserved. And remarkably, I'd discovered that when you demanded better treatment, the people worth keeping in your life rose to meet those expectations. Everyone else simply revealed themselves to be people you were better off without. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of the newly opened Evans Institute for Compassionate Care, watching nursing students, healthcare workers, and families stream through the doors for our inaugural gala. The building itself was a testament to what could be accomplished when resources met purpose. 5 floors of classrooms, simulation labs, support services, and meeting spaces dedicated to advancing healthcare education and family support programs. "Leah, you look radiant," Dr. James Patterson said, appearing at my side in the elegant tuxedo that made him look distinguished rather than simply retired. Over the past year, our friendship had deepened into something neither of us had expected at our age. A genuine romantic partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the luxury of being appreciated for exactly who we were. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I admitted, watching the crowd of people who had come to celebrate not just the Institute's opening, but the unlikely journey that had led to its creation. "You're living your own life," James corrected gently. "Finally. For the first time in decades, you're living a life that matches your actual worth, rather than accommodating other people's limited ability to see it." Logan appeared, with Riley and their 2 children, Emma and Sam, who had become regular fixtures at my Sunday dinners, and had started calling James Grandpa Jim, with the easy acceptance that children bring to new family configurations. "Mom, the media wants photos with the family," Logan said, his arm around Riley, who had blossomed into someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with once she'd stopped trying to manage her mother's insecurities and started building her own identity. "Where's Fiona?" I asked, noting her absence. "She's actually in Paris," Riley said with a smile. "Her second trip this year. Turns out she enjoys traveling much more when she's doing it for her own reasons instead of as a test of other people's loyalty." Fiona had indeed transformed over the past year, channeling her need for attention into volunteer work with elderly residents at assisted living facilities. She'd discovered a talent for organizing social activities and had become something of a beloved figure among people her own age who appreciated her energy and organizational skills. "She sends her congratulations," Logan added, "and her apologies for missing tonight, but she's leading a group tour through the Louvre for American seniors." I smiled, thinking about the woman who had once orchestrated my abandonment and was now helping other elderly Americans experience the cultural adventures she'd once used as weapons against my family. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "please join us in the main auditorium for this evening's program." The auditorium was filled to capacity, 500 people who had come to celebrate not just the Institute's launch, but the story behind it. I saw former colleagues from my nursing career, patients whose lives I'd touched decades ago, families who had been inspired by my television appearances to repair their own damaged relationships. Betty, now serving as the Institute's Director of Nursing Programs, introduced me with the kind of speech that made me grateful for a lifetime of friendship with someone who truly understood my journey. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce a woman who spent 40 years proving that quiet heroism changes the world one life at a time. Tonight, we celebrate not just her individual achievements, but the thousands of healthcare workers who will benefit from the programs she has created. Please welcome the founder of the Evans Institute for Compassionate Care, my dear friend, Leah Evans. The standing ovation lasted longer than I had expected, and I felt genuinely moved by the enthusiasm of people who had gathered to support work that felt like the natural extension of everything I'd always believed about healthcare and human dignity. When I woke up on the morning of my heart surgery 18 months ago, I began, I thought I was facing the worst day of my life. I had been abandoned by my family, left to navigate a medical crisis alone, reduced to feeling like a burden rather than a beloved mother and grandmother. I paused, looking out at the audience, seeing Logan's proud face in the front row, James's encouraging smile, Betty's fierce satisfaction. I was wrong about that day being the worst of my life. It was actually the beginning of the best chapter I've ever lived, because sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually deserve. I talked about the Institute's programs, scholarships for nursing students from underprivileged backgrounds, support groups for families dealing with medical crises, advocacy training for healthcare workers, and counseling services for elderly patients who felt abandoned or undervalued by their families. But our most important program, I continued, isn't about education or financial support. It's about changing the conversation around aging, family responsibility, and the value of people whose contributions have been quiet rather than public. I gestured toward a video screen that showed testimonials from families who had participated in our family communication workshops, adult children who had learned to see their elderly parents as people with their own needs and dreams rather than obligations to be managed. We're teaching families how to have conversations they've been avoiding, how to recognize caregiving as a privilege rather than a burden, how to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The program concluded with the announcement of our first major initiative, a partnership with medical schools across the country to integrate family dynamics training into healthcare education, ensuring that future doctors and nurses would be equipped to address not just medical needs, but the family conflicts that often complicated patient care. As the evening wound down and guests moved to the reception area, I found myself standing with Logan and James in a quiet corner of the lobby, looking up at the bronze plaque that read, "The Evans Institute for Compassionate Care, where healing begins with understanding." "Mom," Logan said quietly, "I need to say something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I'm proud of you, not just for tonight, not just for the Institute, but for having the courage to demand better from all of us. You could have continued accepting whatever scraps of attention we were willing to give you, but instead, you chose to show us what real love actually looks like. And what does real love look like? It looks like expecting people to rise to meet your standards rather than lowering your standards to accommodate their limitations. It looks like valuing yourself enough to walk away from relationships that diminish you, even when those relationships are with people you love unconditionally. James squeezed my hand, his gesture both supportive and proud. "Logan, your mother didn't just save her own life when she demanded better treatment. She saved your family by forcing everyone to confront the difference between obligation and love." As the last guests departed and the building settled into quiet, I walked through the Institute's halls, thinking about the journey from abandonment to recognition, from taken for granted to celebrated, from quiet service to public platform. The woman who had woken up to find a letter of dismissal on her kitchen table 20 months ago had become someone whose story would outlive her by generations, whose foundation would help thousands, whose example would inspire families to choose love over convenience. But the real transformation hadn't been public, it had been personal. I had learned to value myself as highly as others valued me, to demand the respect I deserved, to build relationships that served my growth rather than just accommodating others' comfort. Standing in my beautiful institute, surrounded by evidence of what could be accomplished when resources met purpose, I realized that the greatest miracle of my heart surgery hadn't been the medical intervention. It had been discovering that some people are worth waiting 77 years to become. The biggest surgery I ever had wasn't on my heart. It was on my willingness to accept less than I deserved. Once I healed from that, everything else became possible. Some miracles happen in operating rooms. Others happen when you finally love yourself enough to demand that others love you properly too. At 67, I learned that it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. if you're brave enough to stop settling for who others needed you to be instead. The end.